My name is Mel Stafford. I'm 58 years old, and for the better part of a year, I let my own son believe I was a sentimental old fool who couldn't see past his grief. At the will reading, he sat there in a sport coat he'd bought for the occasion, arms crossed, ready to collect. His wife was beside him, with her phone already in her lap. They'd already figured out which bedroom would become a home office. They had no idea I'd been watching all of them for 11 months. They had no idea that everything they'd said in my kitchen, every side conversation in my driveway, every whisper at Ruth's funeral had been catalogued in the back of my mind like entries in a ledger. And they had no idea that the name my attorney was about to read out loud would change everything they thought they'd already settled. Before I take you back there, if you've ever been the quiet one in your own family, the one who showed up without being asked and got overlooked without being told, this story is for you. Hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'd like to know. Now let me start where it started. On a Tuesday in late October, in the parking lot of a church, standing next to a hole in the ground that held my wife of 31 years. Ruth was 56 when we lost her, breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. She fought every bit of it with the kind of quiet stubbornness that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. We'd built our life in Giles County, Tennessee, 12 acres off a 2-lane road, a house I'd wired myself back when I was still working as an electrician, a vegetable garden Ruth kept from April to October without fail. After the graveside service, people came back to the house. Casseroles covered every counter. My son arrived with his wife, shook the right hands. My daughter came in last and went straight to the kitchen to start making coffee. My son found me on the back porch about 20 minutes in. He's 34. He runs a used car dealership over in Columbia that's been teetering for as long as I can remember. Dad, he put his hand on my shoulder. We should probably sit down sometime this week. Talk through your situation. I looked at him. Ruth had been in the ground for maybe 3 hours. My situation. Just finances. The house, you're out here alone now. It's a lot of property to manage. His wife materialized at his elbow, like she'd been waiting for the opening. She has a particular way of tilting her head when she wants something that she's practiced long enough to believe looks genuine. We just want to make sure you're protected, she said. You worked so hard for all of this. It would be awful to see it go to waste. I nodded. I said I appreciated their concern. But I stood there watching them go back inside, and something shifted in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. A recognition. My daughter was still in the kitchen when I came back in. She'd washed 2 sinks worth of dishes. Nobody asked her to wash. Found the extra folding chairs in the garage and set them out. And was now handing my neighbor a cup of coffee while asking about her hip surgery. She's 29. She's a physical therapist who works at a VA clinic about 45 minutes from here. She drives an 8-year-old Civic with 200,000 miles on it and a bumper sticker from a 5K she ran to raise money for a food bank. She looked up at me from across the kitchen and gave me a small nod. Just checking in, just making sure I was still standing. That was the moment I started watching. I didn't plan it that way, but something in me understood, right there next to Ruth's yellow refrigerator, that the next several months were going to tell me something important. I just needed to stay quiet long enough to hear it. My son called on a Thursday about 2 weeks after the funeral. His dealership had a cash flow problem. He needed a short-term bridge. Just between us, Dad. I'll have it back to you before Christmas. I'd heard that phrase before, in various forms, for about 6 years. I wrote the check. His wife called the following Monday about a different thing entirely. Would I be interested in transferring the property into a family trust? She'd been talking to their accountant. It was just smarter from an estate tax standpoint. It would protect me. I thanked her and said I'd think about it. My daughter called that same week to ask if I needed anything from the grocery store. She was coming through anyway. I said I was fine. She brought groceries anyway and fixed the screen door that had been banging since September. I want to be precise about what those months looked like because the details matter. My son came to visit 3 times between October and February. Each time, there was an agenda. Once it was the trust idea again, more fleshed out, with printed materials from his wife's accountant. Once it was a different angle. Maybe I should think about downsizing. The property was too much to keep up. He had a real estate contact who could give me a number, just to know what options were out there. The third time he brought his wife, and they spent 2 hours talking about their own expenses, in a way that eventually circled back to whether I might consider a short-term loan against the acreage. My daughter came 21 times in that same stretch. I counted. Not every visit was long. Some were 30 minutes, just dropping something off. But she came on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving when I forgot to eat lunch. She came the Saturday. I couldn't get the water heater pilot light to relight. She came the Sunday night I called her because I couldn't sleep and didn't know who else to call. And she sat on the phone with me for an hour talking about nothing in particular, until I felt steady again. She never asked me for a single thing. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you this to settle a score. I told myself that clearly, more than once, during those months. A man who spends his final years plotting against his own children becomes the worst version of himself. That's not what this was. This was about trying to see the truth without flinching from it. And the truth was getting hard to look at. March brought a specific moment I couldn't let go of afterward. My son's family came for the weekend. My 2 grandchildren, 7 and 5, were there, and I was glad for the noise and the mess. My daughter came too on Saturday afternoon, with a casserole and a handmade card the veterans at her clinic had signed for me. They'd seen her looking sad that week, and she'd told them about losing her mother. She set the card on the counter, and my son's wife picked it up, glanced at it, set it back down. "That's sweet," she said, "the way you say it when you mean something else." Later, after dinner, when my daughter was at the sink and my son was getting the kids ready for bed, his wife turned to me at the kitchen table. "I worry she's going to burn herself out, coming out here all the time," she said. "She doesn't really have much of a life. I think being out here gives her purpose." She paused. "You shouldn't feel guilty about it." I kept my face still. I don't. But I understood exactly what she was doing. She was constructing a story in which my daughter's devotion was a symptom of a problem, rather than an expression of character. She was building a case, piece by piece, so that when the time came, it would already be in the air. I opened my notebook that night and wrote down the date and exactly what she'd said. April was when I drove into Lawrenceburg and sat down across from an attorney named Mr. Finley. He's been practicing in Lawrence County for nearly 30 years. Quiet office above a tax prep place on the square, law books organized by year, reading glasses he wore on a chain. He had a reputation for being thorough and for not talking more than he needed to. I told him everything, about the phone calls, about the 3 visits with agendas, about the trust proposal and the real estate contact, about the comment at the kitchen table in March. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands. "They may try to contest, given what's at stake." I'd thought about that. The 12 acres would appraise between $300,000 and $360,000 depending on the market. Plus the house. Plus 30 years of Ruth and me doing without vacations and new cars and things we wanted, but decided we could live without. "We document everything," he said. "We build it right." He pulled out a legal pad, "And I want to suggest something before you sign anything. I'd like you to see a physician for a written cognitive evaluation, dated, filed with the will." I didn't fully understand why at the time. I said yes anyway. Walking back to my truck in the April sun, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Ruth got sick. A kind of clarity, like I'd finally stopped circling a decision and made it. Let me step back from the story for just a moment. I know some of you watching have sat at your own kitchen table and felt invisible. You've been the one who showed up every week, while someone else sent a text message once a month and called it staying in touch. If that's your life right now, leave me a comment. Tell me your story, because the quiet ones deserve to be heard. Hit that like button so this reaches someone who needs it tonight. Let me take you back, because by summer things had gotten very complicated. My son found out I'd been to see an attorney. I don't know exactly how. Small towns don't keep secrets. But he showed up at the house on a Saturday in June without calling ahead. He sat at the kitchen table and got right to it. "Dad, we need to talk about what you're doing." "I'm having coffee," I said. "You want some?" "I mean the lawyer. People talk." I sat down across from him. "It's my business, son. It affects all of us." He leaned forward. "Look, I know you've had a hard year. We all have. But you shouldn't be making big decisions right now. You're still grieving." He was using a gentle voice he didn't usually use with me. The kind of gentle you deploy when you're worried something is slipping away from you. I'm making decisions I should have made years ago, I said. He left without finishing his coffee. 2 weeks later, his wife called and suggested, carefully, kindly, that maybe I should talk to someone, a therapist. She knew a doctor in Nashville who specialized in grief-related cognitive changes. She was just worried. She just wanted to make sure I was okay. I wrote the date in my notebook. Then I called Mr. Finley. He gave me the name of a physician. I made the appointment. The worst moment came in September. My daughter had been coming twice a week by then. She'd noticed my blood pressure was up and had started checking in more. She wasn't dramatic about it. She'd bring something for dinner, sit with me a while, make sure I'd eaten. One Tuesday evening, she arrived to find my son's wife already at the kitchen table. They'd come without telling her. They had papers with them, a document about power of attorney, drafted by someone. Just a precaution, they said, standard, just so someone could help manage things if anything ever happened. My daughter stood in the doorway. He has both his kids for that, she said. My son's wife looked up with that tilted head patience. Of course, we just thought it made sense to have everything organized, given how much is involved. Given how much, my daughter repeated quietly. She's right here, I said, nodding toward my daughter. She can be part of any conversation about me. My son cleared his throat. Dad, we're not trying to exclude anyone. My daughter looked at me, not pleading, just checking to see what I needed. I won't be signing anything today, I said. Thank you both for coming. They left. My daughter stayed and heated up the soup she'd brought. We didn't talk about it directly. She just moved around the kitchen, and eventually I said, "You don't need to worry." She didn't ask what I meant. She nodded. I'd already taken care of it. She just didn't know that yet. My heart started giving me real trouble in November. Not a surprise. My father went the same way, and my cardiologist had been warning me about the irregular rhythm for 2 years. By November, it was interrupting my sleep and making the stairs something I had to think about before I took them. My daughter moved some things into the spare bedroom. The week she noticed I was getting winded walking to the mailbox. She didn't announce it. She just started staying over most nights, learning my medication schedule, sleeping lightly enough to hear me if I got up. My son called once. He'd heard I wasn't doing well. He asked if there was anything he needed to know about. I told him I had good care and left it at that. Mr. Finley and I met one more time in December. I brought him a letter I'd spent 3 weeks writing by hand at the kitchen table after my daughter went to sleep. I wanted it read aloud at the will reading, every word. He read it twice. He folded it into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote across the flap in careful handwriting, "To be read after." "Are you sure you want all of them in the room?" he asked. "They talked about me like I'd already gone," I said. "I'd like them to hear me while they're still in their chairs." He nodded. My neighbors from down the road signed as witnesses, good people with no stake in anything. I signed my name in Mr. Finley's office with a steadier hand than I expected. Walking back to my truck in the December cold, I felt light in a way I hadn't felt since before Ruth got sick. The words were locked away. They would wait as long as they needed to. The last good night I remember was in January. My daughter made Ruth's pot roast recipe, which she'd finally gotten right after 7 attempts. We ate at the kitchen table, and I told her story about her mother I hadn't told in a long time. She laughed at the one about the camping trip in the Smokies that went sideways. She got quiet at the one about the night before her own parents' anniversary, the year Ruth stopped being able to drive herself anywhere. After dinner, I sat in the recliner by the window. Outside, 12 January acres of Tennessee, the creek at the bottom of the property would be running slow and cold. My daughter brought me tea without being asked. I told her thank you for staying. She said where else would she be? I closed my eyes. The house was warm. My whole life was in these walls and in the person sitting 10 feet away, reading a paperback with her feet tucked under her on the couch. The tightness started in my chest around 9 o'clock. I recognized it. I'd been half expecting it for 2 months. I didn't fight it. Everything was already in order. The words were sealed in a lawyer's office, 22 miles away, waiting for the right room and the right moment. My daughter's hand was the last thing I felt. They buried me on a Friday, and 3 days later, Mr. Finley's office held the reading. I've imagined that room so many times it feels like memory. My son came in a blazer, standing taller than usual, the way men do when they expect to receive something. His wife wore black that was a little too fitted for a Monday morning. She had a folder under her arm. I'd learn later it held notes on what legal grounds might exist to challenge a will when a person had been, as she'd phrased it to a friend, cognitively declining. They took the front seats. My daughter arrived last and sat near the back in the coat she'd worn to every one of my doctor appointments. She told someone afterward she'd almost not come. She said she wasn't expecting anything except to hear her father's voice one more time through someone else's reading of his words. Mr. Finley sat behind his desk with 2 documents centered in front of him. A clock on the wall ticked in the quiet. My son leaned over to his wife and said something she laughed softly at. My daughter looked at her hands. Mr. Finley cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Mel left specific instructions for how this proceeding should go. I'm going to follow them exactly." He opened the first document. "To my son, I leave the sum of $8,000 and a letter I've asked to be read aloud." My son shifted in his seat. That wasn't the number he'd been calculating. "And to my daughter," Mr. Finley continued, "I leave the entirety of the remaining estate, the house, the 12 acres, and all accounts and savings." For a moment, nobody moved. Then my son said, "I'm sorry, what?" Mr. Finley read it again without inflection. My son's wife set her folder on her lap and held it there with both hands. My son turned all the way around and looked at his sister sitting in the back row. She was completely still with one hand over her mouth, eyes wide and uncomprehending, like she'd heard words in a language she only half understood. "That's not right," my son said. "He wasn't. She was out there every week. She had total access. This is a textbook undue influence situation, and I am going to..." Mr. Finley raised one hand. He opened the second document. "On the same date your father signed his will," he said. "He also underwent a written cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Patton of Lawrenceburg. The evaluation states clearly that Mel Stafford was of sound mind, fully competent, and demonstrated no signs of cognitive impairment." He tapped the other page. "The will is witnessed by Mr. and Mrs. Holcomb, both of whom are present today, neither of whom had any financial interest in this estate." The Holcombs nodded from their chairs along the wall. "Your father anticipated this argument," Mr. Finley said. "Every avenue you're considering has already been addressed. You are welcome to consult an attorney. I'll tell you now what that attorney will tell you. Contesting this will is expensive, it is public, and you will not prevail." My son stood there with his mouth open for a long moment. Then he sat back down. His wife closed her folder. In the back of the room, my daughter had both hands over her face. Her shoulders were shaking. Not with grief, exactly, but with something more complicated. The specific kind of release that happens when you've spent years wondering if anyone truly saw you, and then someone proves that they did. Mr. Finley broke the seal on the envelope. He unfolded the letter and read it in my own words, plainly, the way I'd written it at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. with Ruth's reading glasses on the bench in front of me, for no reason I could quite explain. "To my children, I know you're surprised. I know at least one of you is angry. So I'm going to explain it as plainly as I can, in my own words, the same way I tried to live. When your mother was sick, one of you drove her to chemotherapy 16 times. I counted. The other called to check in on the good days and went quiet on the bad ones. When my heart started failing this past year, one of you moved into the spare room so I wouldn't be alone in the night. The other one called once and asked what he needed to know. I love both of my children. That has never been a question. But love and reward are not the same thing, and it took me a long time to understand that clearly enough to act on it. Real care cannot be performed at the last minute. It's what happens on an ordinary Tuesday when there's nothing in it, and nobody watching and a person shows up anyway. Your sisters showed up every Tuesday, and every other day she could manage. I didn't disinherit you to punish you. I left you what a father owes his child. I gave the rest to the one who earned it the only way anything real gets earned, by doing the work without keeping score. Be kinder to her than you were. She deserved better from this family. Your father." Mr. Finley set the page down. The silence lasted long enough that the heating system clicked on, and everyone heard it. Then my son stood up, and then he sat back down, and then he said nothing at all. There was nothing left to say. I'd seen the trap they were building, and I'd sealed it before they finished building it. The competency argument gone. The undue influence argument gone. The impulsive old man argument gone. Every door bricked shut from the inside before they ever raised a hand to knock. My son's dealership folded 5 months later. He'd been counting on an inheritance to service a debt he'd never mentioned to anyone. When it didn't come, the bank moved. The lot got cleared out, piece by piece. In the slow and public way those things happen in small towns. I take no satisfaction in that. He was still my son, but he'd built his plans on ground that was never his to build on. His wife was gone by summer. The warmth she'd cultivated for years turned out to be conditional on a certain kind of future. When that future dissolved, the warmth went with it. 2 attorneys told her the same thing about contesting. Airtight, move on. She moved on. My daughter kept the house. She kept my tools in the workshop, and Ruth's curtains in the kitchen, and drank her coffee every morning on the back porch, overlooking 12 acres that her parents had bought cheap, and spent 3 decades loving into something worth keeping. About 4 months after the reading, my son drove out to the house and sat at the kitchen table. He didn't ask for anything. He said he wanted to talk. She let him in. He told her he was sorry. Not sorry that he'd lost, but sorry for what he'd been. He said that somewhere in the middle of losing everything else he'd lost, he understood that he'd lost his father before his father was even gone. That he'd looked at me and seen a balance sheet rather than the man who'd stayed up all night when he had pneumonia at 11 years old and driven him to the emergency room in a snowstorm because he didn't want to wait until morning. My daughter didn't rush to forgive him. That's not her nature. She doesn't do the easy forgiveness that costs nothing. But she didn't close the door either. She told him her own children would always know their grandfather, that whatever happened between the 2 of them, that part was not negotiable. He cried. Not the way you cry over money, the other kind. The kind that comes from realizing you had something and spent it badly, and can't get that particular currency back. She let him sit there until he was finished. Down by the creek on the flat-bottom acre where I used to fish with both my kids on summer mornings when they were small, my daughter cleared the brush and built a raised bed garden. She put a sign at the VA clinic where she worked and another at the county extension office. She opened the space to veterans, to retirees, to families from the food insecure list the clinic maintained. She built 2 picnic tables from lumber she bought at the hardware store in town and stained herself on a Saturday in early April. She called it the Ruth and Mel Stafford Garden. The first person who wasn't family to ever turn soil on those 12 acres was an 81-year-old Army veteran from Pulaski who said he'd never grown a thing in his life and wasn't sure he had the patience for it. He grew tomatoes that summer. He brought some by the clinic in September in a paper bag and told my daughter they were the best he'd ever eaten. I believe they were. Here is what I know after 58 years of watching some people, including the ones I raised myself. Staying quiet is not the same as giving up. I held still for 11 months while my family sorted itself into who they actually were underneath the performances. I didn't argue. I didn't warn anyone. I watched and I wrote things down in the back of my mind, and I waited for the truth to finish forming on its own. They mistook my patience for confusion. They thought a grieving man who didn't push back was a man who could be redirected. They were wrong. I wasn't drifting. I was paying attention. And the longer I paid attention, the more clearly I saw something I should have said out loud years before, but never quite found the right moment for. An inheritance isn't something you're owed because of biology. It's something you're trusted with because of character. And character doesn't show up at the reading. It shows up on an ordinary Tuesday when there's nothing to gain, and no one watching, and you come anyway because someone you love needs you to. My daughter understood that without ever being taught it. She always had. They called her the one without ambition, the one who settled, the one who couldn't get out of her own way long enough to build something worth having. She built the most important thing in that family. She built the kind of person who shows up. And in the end, the house, the land, the whole 31 years of what her mother and I made together, all of it went to her, not as a prize, as a truth, the last honest word I had to give. She was worth every word of it. If this story found something in you, leave a comment. Tell me about the quiet person in your family, the one who was always there, always passed over, always the last one anyone thought to thank. Give them a sentence. Right here, they've earned it. And if you want to hear more about the truth that waits patiently for its moment, there's another story waiting for you when you're ready. Take care of the ones who stay.